Marcus leaned toward me, his breath warm against my ear as the waiter poured wine around our table. His words sent ice through my veins. "We need to leave. You didn't look under the table. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." I forced my smile to remain steady as I glanced around at the faces surrounding us. My sister Rebecca, her husband David, my parents, and Marcus's business partner Jake with his wife Sophie. The private dining room at Celestino's buzzed with comfortable conversation, crystal glasses catching the candlelight, everything appearing perfect for what was supposed to be our engagement celebration. But Marcus's hand was trembling against mine. And when I casually dropped my napkin and bent to retrieve it, I saw what had terrified my fiancé into a cold sweat. A small recording device, no bigger than a matchbox, was taped beneath the mahogany table directly under where Marcus sat. My name is Elena Rodriguez, and until that moment, I thought the most dangerous thing about my life was deciding whether to take Marcus Chen's last name after our wedding next spring. I'm a forensic accountant. I find financial discrepancies that people desperately want to keep hidden. It's methodical work, requiring patience and an eye for patterns that don't quite fit. What I never expected was to need those same skills to uncover the truth about the man I'd planned to spend my life with. The recording device changed everything, but not in the way Marcus thought it would. I sat back up slowly, my mind already shifting into the analytical mode that had made my career. Someone had planted surveillance equipment at our private celebration. The question was who, and more importantly, why they felt it necessary to record whatever Marcus might say tonight. "Everything okay?" Rebecca asked, noticing the sudden tension between Marcus and me. "Perfect," I replied smoothly, reaching for my wine glass. Just admiring the beautiful table setting. Marcus shot me a look of pure panic. He expected me to make excuses, to help orchestrate our immediate departure, to be complicit in whatever he was hiding. Instead, I settled more comfortably into my chair and turned my attention to my father, who was raising his glass for a toast. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "To Elena and Marcus," Dad began, his voice carrying the warmth that had made him beloved in our small Connecticut town where he'd served as mayor for 12 years. "May your marriage be filled with honesty, trust, and the kind of partnership that weathers every storm." The irony wasn't lost on me as I clinked glasses with everyone around the table, Marcus's hand now visibly shaking as he reached for his wine. I'd spent 2 years building a relationship I thought was based on exactly those values: honesty, trust, partnership. We'd met at a forensic accounting conference in Chicago, where Marcus had given a presentation on international corporate compliance. His intelligence had attracted me first, then his quiet confidence and the way he listened when I spoke about my work. Our courtship had been refreshingly adult: long conversations over coffee, weekend trips to small New England towns, dinners, where we actually talked instead of staring at our phones. When he proposed 3 months ago on a beach in Maine, I'd felt like the luckiest woman alive. Marcus Chen was everything I thought I wanted: stable, successful, seemingly transparent about his life and goals. Now, watching him fidget with his napkin while sweat beaded on his forehead despite the air conditioning, I realized how little I actually knew about the man I'd agreed to marry. "Marcus, you look pale," my mother observed with the concern that made her an exceptional pediatric nurse. "Are you feeling all right?" "Just tired," he managed. "Long week at the office." This was true. Marcus worked as a compliance officer for Meridian Financial, a mid-sized investment firm based in Hartford. Or at least, that's what I'd believed until this moment. The presence of a recording device suggested someone suspected Marcus of saying things that contradicted his public persona. Jake, Marcus's supposed business partner, was studying him with an expression I couldn't quite read. They'd known each other for 5 years, according to Marcus, having met when Jake joined Meridian's international division. But now I noticed things I'd overlooked before. How Jake always steered conversations away from specific work details. How he and Marcus never seemed to share the casual inside jokes or references that real colleagues develop. "So Marcus," David said, cutting into his filet mignon, "Elena tells us you're working on some exciting international projects. Expanding Meridian's Asian markets?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Marcus's fork froze halfway to his mouth, and I saw a bead of sweat actually drop from his hairline onto his plate. "It's confidential," Marcus finally replied. "You understand." But I was starting to understand something entirely different. In 2 years of dating, Marcus had never once brought work home, never complained about colleagues or difficult clients, never even mentioned specific deals or deadlines. I'd attributed this to professional discretion, even admired his ability to separate work from personal life. Now, it seemed more likely that he was hiding something far more significant than client confidentiality. The conversation flowed around us as our family continued celebrating our engagement, but I found myself cataloging every reaction, every micro-expression on Marcus's face. When Rebecca mentioned our upcoming venue visit, he nodded absently. When my mother brought up the guest list, his response was monosyllabic. The man who had spent hours enthusiastically planning our future together suddenly seemed desperate to escape any discussion of it. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced down, expecting maybe a congratulation from a friend who couldn't make dinner. Instead, I saw an unknown number with a message that made my blood run cold. "Check your fiancé's passport. Ask him about Singapore. Ask him about the money. You deserve the truth before you marry a lie." I set my phone face down on the table, my training kicking in automatically. Anonymous tips weren't unusual in my line of work. People often reached out when they suspected financial wrongdoing, but feared retaliation for coming forward directly. But receiving one about my own fiancé during our engagement dinner felt like being struck by lightning. Marcus was watching me intently. "Work?" he asked. "Something like that," I replied. Under the table, I felt him squeeze my hand 3 times, our private signal that meant, "I love you." But his palm was clammy, and the gesture felt desperate rather than affectionate. The waiter appeared with dessert menus, and I made my decision. If Marcus wanted to leave because of the recording device, I would accommodate him, but not for the reasons he expected. "You know what?" I announced to the table. "I think Marcus might be right about calling it an early evening. I have some work to catch up on tonight anyway." Relief flooded Marcus's face so completely that I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Of course, sweetheart," my mother said, though I could see disappointment in her eyes. She'd been looking forward to this celebration for weeks. "We understand how demanding your careers are." As we made our goodbyes and headed for the parking garage, Marcus finally seemed to relax. He put his arm around my waist as we waited for the elevator, the familiar gesture that usually made me feel secure and loved. Tonight, it felt like being embraced by a stranger. "Thank you," he murmured as the elevator doors closed. I know that was abrupt, but I really wasn't feeling well. "Of course," I said, "though we should probably talk about whatever made you so nervous in there." His arm stiffened around me. I wasn't nervous, just tired, like I said. The elevator reached the parking level, and we walked toward his BMW in silence. I was calculating how to approach what came next. I needed access to Marcus's apartment, specifically to his passport and any financial documents he might have. The anonymous text had given me specific leads to follow, and my forensic training had taught me never to ignore credible tips, even when they hit close to home. Especially when they hit close to home. "Why don't you come back to my place tonight?" Marcus suggested as we reached his car. "We could order takeout, watch a movie, relax after all the dinner conversation." Perfect. His apartment would give me access to whatever he was hiding. That sounds wonderful, I agreed, letting him open the passenger door for me with the courtesy that had charmed me from our first date. As Marcus drove through Hartford's evening traffic, I stared out the window at the familiar streets and tried to process what was happening. 6 hours ago, I'd been a woman preparing to celebrate her engagement to a man she loved and trusted. Now I was conducting covert surveillance on my own fiancé, following anonymous leads that suggested everything I believed about him might be false. The recording device bothered me most of all. Professional surveillance equipment didn't appear at random dinner parties. It was placed deliberately by someone who expected to capture incriminating conversations. Someone knew something about Marcus that I didn't, and they'd chosen our engagement celebration as the moment to gather evidence. The question was whether they were trying to protect me or use me. Marcus's apartment was in a converted warehouse in Hartford's Arts District, all exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows. I'd always loved the space, had even started mentally arranging my furniture to blend with his once we moved in together after the wedding. Now I looked around with different eyes, searching for details I might have missed. "Wine?" Marcus asked, heading toward the kitchen. "Please?" I needed him relaxed and distracted while I figured out how to access his private documents. He returned with 2 glasses of the Pinot Grigio we'd shared on our second date, the wine that had become our wine over the course of our relationship. Even that gesture, which should have been romantic, now felt potentially calculated. "I'm sorry about tonight," he said, settling beside me on his leather sofa. "I know how much these family celebrations mean to you." "They do," I agreed. "Which is why I was surprised you wanted to leave early. Usually you love talking with my parents." Marcus sipped his wine, avoiding eye contact. "I've just been under a lot of pressure at work lately. Big compliance audit coming up. International regulations. Changing, you know how it is." I did know how corporate compliance audits worked. They were thorough, stressful, and often revealed discrepancies that companies preferred to keep private. If Marcus was genuinely worried about an upcoming audit, it might explain his nervousness. But it didn't explain the recording device or the anonymous text message. "Maybe talking about it would help," I suggested. "I deal with financial investigations all the time. I might have some insight." The offer was genuine. Despite my growing suspicions, part of me still hoped there was an innocent explanation for everything. Maybe Marcus was being falsely accused of something at work. Maybe the recording device was planted by actual criminals trying to frame him. Maybe the anonymous text was from someone with a grudge against either him or me. But Marcus's reaction to my offer eliminated any remaining doubt that something was seriously wrong. "It's not really something I can discuss," he said quickly. "Client confidentiality, you understand?" "Of course." I set down my wine glass and moved closer to him on the couch. "But you know you can trust me, right? Whatever's going on, we can face it together." For a moment, his guard dropped completely. I saw fear in his eyes, raw, desperate fear that went far beyond normal work stress. He reached for me, his hands cupping my face with an intensity that was almost desperate. "Elena," he said, "I need you to know that whatever happens, whatever you might hear about me, I love you. That's real. That's never been a lie." The words sent a chill through me. Whatever Marcus was hiding, it was significant enough that he expected it to end our relationship when it came to light. And the fact that he felt compelled to assure me his love was genuine suggested that almost everything else about our relationship might not be. "What might I hear about you?" I asked gently. He pulled back, the wall immediately rebuilding behind his eyes. "Nothing. I'm just tired and paranoid from work stress. Let's talk about something else." But I was done talking. It was time to start investigating. "Actually, I'm getting a headache," I said, which wasn't entirely untrue. "Do you have any aspirin?" "Bathroom." "Medicine cabinet," Marcus said, already reaching for the TV remote. I walked toward his bathroom, but instead of stopping there, I continued down the hallway to his bedroom. I had maybe 3 minutes before he'd start wondering what was taking so long. Marcus's dresser drawers were organized with military precision, another trait I'd found attractive when I thought it reflected his attention to detail at work. Now I wondered what else he was controlling so carefully. I found his passport in the second drawer, tucked inside a leather document folder along with what appeared to be travel receipts and boarding passes. The passport told an interesting story. In the past 18 months, while Marcus had told me he was working on domestic compliance issues, he'd actually made 6 trips to Singapore, 2 to Hong Kong, and 1 to the Cayman Islands. The dates corresponded with periods when he'd claimed to be attending conferences or visiting his mother in California. I quickly photographed the relevant pages with my phone, my hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. This was what I did professionally: document evidence, follow paper trails, piece together financial puzzles. The fact that the puzzle involved my fiancé didn't change the methodology. A receipt from a Singapore bank fell out of the passport folder. It wasn't in English, but the numbers were clear enough. A deposit of $2.3 million dated just 2 months ago. "Elena? You okay in there?" Marcus called from the living room. "Just looking for the aspirin," I called back, quickly photographing the receipt and returning everything to its original position. In the bathroom, I actually did take 2 aspirin. My head was pounding now with the implications of what I'd found. Then I splashed cold water on my face and looked at myself in Marcus's mirror. The woman looking back still wore the diamond engagement ring I'd been so proud of 3 hours ago. But everything else had changed. When I returned to the living room, Marcus was channel surfing with the distracted energy of someone whose mind was elsewhere. He looked up when I sat down, and I saw him studying my expression. "Feeling better?" he asked. "Much, thanks." I curled up against him on the couch, letting him put his arm around me while my mind raced through everything I'd discovered. The Singapore trips could be legitimate business. Meridian Financial did have international clients. But the secrecy bothered me, as did the timing. Marcus had started traveling extensively right around the time our relationship became serious, when he'd started talking about marriage and our future together. The bank receipt was harder to explain. Away. $2.3 million was far more money than Marcus could have legitimately earned, even in a successful compliance career. And Singapore's banking privacy laws made it a popular destination for people trying to hide assets from U.S. authorities. My phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Check his laptop. Password is Elena 2025. He's not as smart as he thinks. You have until tomorrow, before it's too late. I stared at the message, my blood running. Cold. Someone was watching us, knew I'd been searching Marcus's bedroom, and was actively helping me uncover whatever he was hiding. This wasn't a concerned friend or anonymous tipster. This was someone with detailed knowledge of Marcus's activities and access to his personal information. Someone who knew his laptop password included my name and our planned wedding year. Marcus was dozing against me, exhausted by whatever stress he'd been carrying. I studied his face in the flickering light of the television, trying to reconcile the man I'd fallen in love with and the stranger whose secrets I was uncovering. His features were the same. The strong jaw, the long eyelashes that had made me jealous, the small scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood accident he'd told me about on our 4th date. But faces could lie just as easily as words, and Marcus had clearly been lying about far more than I'd realized. His laptop was on the kitchen counter, closed but not locked away. If the anonymous tipster was right about the password, I could access whatever files Marcus was hiding. But doing so would cross a line I'd never crossed before, using my professional skills to investigate someone I loved without their knowledge or consent. The alternative was marrying a man who might be involved in international financial crimes, someone who'd built our entire relationship on a foundation of lies. I made my decision, carefully extracting myself from Marcus's sleeping embrace. I moved silently to the kitchen. His laptop opened with a quiet click, and the login screen appeared. I typed Elena 2025 and held my breath. The desktop loaded immediately. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, overwhelmed by the violation of privacy and the confirmation that someone else knew Marcus better than I did. Then my professional training took over, and I began systematically exploring the files that would tell me who I'd really been planning to marry. What I found in the next 20 minutes changed everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and the man sleeping peacefully on the couch behind me. Marcus's laptop contained a digital maze of encrypted files, offshore banking records, and communication logs that painted a picture so damning I had to read through it twice to believe what I was seeing. My fiancé wasn't just hiding money. He was running a sophisticated financial laundering operation through Meridian Financial, using his compliance position to mask millions of dollars flowing from questionable sources through Singapore banks and into legitimate U.S. investments. The most shocking discovery was a folder labeled Insurance Policy, containing detailed financial records on 12 other Meridian employees, including Jake. Marcus wasn't just a criminal. He was blackmailing his colleagues to maintain their silence about the operation. Each file contained evidence of smaller financial improprieties that Marcus had uncovered and was using as leverage. But it was the subfolder marked Elena that made my hands tremble as I opened it. Inside were screenshots of my own bank accounts, credit reports, employment records, and even transcripts of phone calls I'd had with clients. Marcus had been conducting surveillance on me for over a year, documenting my professional activities and personal finances with the thoroughness of a federal investigation. A document titled Contingency Planning outlined his strategy for our relationship in clinical detail. I was listed as Asset E, a forensic accountant whose credibility and professional reputation could provide cover for his activities if suspicion ever fell on him. Our engagement wasn't just a romantic milestone. It was phase 3 of a plan to create the perfect alibi. A man married to someone who investigated financial crimes for a living couldn't possibly be running his own criminal enterprise. The final document in my folder was a timeline showing how he'd orchestrated our entire relationship. Our chance meeting at the Chicago conference hadn't been coincidental. Marcus had researched attendees in advance and specifically targeted me based on my professional background and personal profile. Even our second date, when he'd ordered the Pinot Grigio that became our wine, had been planned after he'd somehow accessed my social media posts about wine preferences. I sat in his kitchen staring at 2 years of my life reduced to a series of strategic manipulations, feeling nauseated by the realization that nothing about our relationship had been genuine. Every romantic gesture, every intimate conversation, every moment I'd treasured as evidence of our connection had been calculated to advance his criminal agenda. My phone buzzed again. The anonymous contact was persistent. Now you know. But there's more. Check the folder marked Final Phase. You need to see what he's planning for tomorrow. The Final Phase folder contained documents that turned my blood to ice. Marcus wasn't just using me as cover for his existing crimes. He was planning to frame me for them. Bank records showed transfers being set up to flow through accounts in my name, creating a paper trail that would implicate me in the money laundering scheme. Legal documents outlined how he would claim I'd been the mastermind all along, using my forensic expertise to design the operation while he'd been an unwilling accomplice manipulated by someone he loved. The timeline was brutal. In its precision, our wedding was scheduled for 6 weeks from now. 5 weeks from now, according to his plan, an anonymous tip would trigger a federal investigation into the laundering scheme. 4 weeks from now, evidence would surface pointing to my involvement. 3 weeks from now, Marcus would approach authorities claiming he'd discovered his fiancé's criminal activities and wanted to cooperate with the investigation. By our original wedding date, I would be in federal custody while Marcus disappeared, with $15 million in laundered funds and a new identity already prepared. The most chilling detail was a psychological profile he'd compiled on me, predicting exactly how I would react to each phase of his plan. He knew me well enough to anticipate that I would initially defend him when the investigation began, that my professional instincts would make me want to examine the evidence personally, and that my trust in him would prevent me from suspecting his involvement until it was too late to prove my innocence. I had been so thoroughly studied, catalogued, and predicted that reading the profile felt like looking at my own autopsy report. Behind me, Marcus stirred on the couch. I quickly closed the laptop and returned to the living room, settling beside him as naturally as I could manage while my world collapsed around me. "Did I fall asleep?" he asked, blinking in the television's glow. "Just for a few minutes," I replied, proud that my voice remained steady. "You looked peaceful." He stretched and checked his watch. "I should probably get you home. Big day tomorrow." Tomorrow. According to the files I'd just read, tomorrow was when Marcus planned to begin the final phase of his scheme. Whatever that meant specifically, I was running out of time to figure out how to protect myself. "Actually," I said, "why don't I stay over? It's late, and I don't have any early meetings." Marcus hesitated, and I caught a flicker of something, annoyance, concern, across his features before he smiled. Of course, I'd love that. But I could see him calculating, trying to determine if my presence would interfere with whatever he had planned for tomorrow. The man who'd once told me he never felt more content than when I stayed overnight now seemed uncomfortable with the idea. "I should check my email quickly before bed," I said. "Mind if I use your laptop?" "Actually, the battery's dead," Marcus replied immediately. "But you can use my phone if it's urgent." Another lie. I'd just spent 20 minutes on his laptop. The battery was fully charged. Marcus was now actively preventing me from accessing his computer, which meant he suspected I might be getting suspicious. We went through the motions of preparing for bed with the familiar choreography of a couple who'd shared countless nights together. Marcus brushed his teeth while I changed into the pajamas I kept in his dresser drawer. I washed my face while he checked his phone one final time. We moved around each other in his bedroom with the practiced efficiency of people who knew each other's routines perfectly. Except now I knew that Marcus's knowledge of my routines came from surveillance rather than intimacy, and his familiarity with my preferences was the result of systematic study rather than emotional connection. As we lay in his bed with the lights off, Marcus's breathing gradually settled into the deep rhythm of sleep. I waited another 30 minutes, counting his breaths to ensure he was truly unconscious, before carefully sliding out of bed. I needed to copy everything I'd found on his laptop. Tomorrow, when Marcus initiated whatever final phase he'd planned, I would be ready with evidence of his true activities. But first, I had to figure out who was feeding me information and why they were helping me. In the kitchen, I opened the laptop again and began systematically downloading files to a secure cloud storage account I maintained for sensitive work. Documents. The process would take time, but I needed comprehensive evidence if I was going to expose Marcus's operation without implicating myself. My phone vibrated with another message. "Smart move staying overnight. He's planning to plant evidence in your apartment tomorrow while you're at work. Check his car keys. He's had copies made of all your keys." I stared at the message, feeling trapped in a nightmare that kept getting worse. Marcus had keys to my apartment, which I'd given him months ago as a symbol of trust. Tomorrow, while I was working, he planned to use those keys to plant evidence that would support his plan to frame me. The car keys were in a bowl by his front door, along with his wallet and sunglasses. I examined them with the small flashlight app on my phone, looking for anything unusual. The familiar keys to his BMW were there, along with his office keys and what I'd always assumed were keys to his storage unit. But now I noticed 2 keys I didn't recognize, newer, shinier than the others, with the distinctive grooves of recently cut duplicates. I pulled out my own keys for comparison, and my stomach dropped. The unknown keys were perfect matches for my apartment's front door and mailbox. Marcus had been planning this betrayal for months, methodically acquiring the tools he'd need to destroy my life while maintaining the facade of a loving relationship. Every kiss, every "I love you," every conversation about our future had been delivered by someone who was simultaneously planning my downfall. I photographed the keys and returned them to their exact position in the bowl. Then I went back to the laptop to continue documenting evidence while Marcus slept peacefully in the next room. The banking records revealed the full scope of his operation. Over 18 months, Marcus had laundered nearly $50 million through a network of shell companies and offshore accounts. The money came from various sources: drug trafficking organizations, arms dealers, corrupt politicians, all of whom needed their illicit gains converted into legitimate investments. Marcus's position at Meridian Financial gave him perfect cover. As a compliance officer, he was supposed to identify and report suspicious financial activities. Instead, he was facilitating them while creating the appearance of rigorous oversight. His colleagues who'd discovered pieces of the operation found themselves blackmailed into silence, trapped by their own smaller indiscretions that Marcus had carefully documented. The sophistication of the scheme was genuinely impressive from a technical standpoint. If I'd encountered it as a professional investigation, I would have admired the criminal creativity involved. But knowing that the man who'd created it had simultaneously been planning to destroy my life made every clever detail feel like a personal assault. My phone buzzed again. "Almost done? You have company coming." I looked up from the laptop screen, straining to hear any sounds from outside the apartment. After a moment, I caught the faint sound of footsteps in the hallway outside Marcus's door, followed by the quiet scrape of a key in the lock. Someone else had keys to Marcus's apartment, and they were coming inside. I quickly closed the laptop and moved silently toward the bedroom, planning to pretend I'd been asleep the entire time. But the approaching footsteps were too close. Whoever was entering would reach the kitchen before I could make it down the hallway unseen. Instead, I ducked behind the kitchen island, crouching in the shadows while my heart hammered against my ribs. Through the gap between the island and the cabinet, I could see the front door opening slowly. Jake entered first, followed by a woman I didn't recognize. Asian, probably in her 40s, wearing expensive clothes and moving with the confidence of someone accustomed to command. Behind them came two men who looked like private security, their eyes scanning the apartment professionally. "He's asleep?" the woman asked quietly. "Should be," Jake replied. "Elena's here too, so we need to be careful." They knew I was here. They knew Marcus was asleep. This was a planned meeting, but one that Marcus apparently wasn't supposed to know about. "Where is it?" the woman asked. Jake pointed toward the kitchen, and my blood turned to ice. They were heading directly toward where I was hiding, but instead of discovering me behind the island, Jake opened a cabinet I'd never seen Marcus use and removed what appeared to be a briefcase. The woman examined its contents quickly, nodding with satisfaction. "Everything's here," she confirmed. "Account numbers, access codes, transfer schedules. We can proceed tomorrow as planned." "What about Elena?" Jake asked. "Marcus is getting sloppy. He should have ended things with her months ago instead of dragging this out." "Marcus has emotional attachments," the woman replied with obvious distaste. "It makes him weak, but it also makes him predictable. He won't deviate from the plan now. He's too invested in believing he can have both the money and the girl." Of the security men spoke for the first time. "If she becomes a problem?" "She won't," the woman interrupted firmly. "Marcus has been very thorough in his preparations. Elena Rodriguez will be so buried in federal charges that she'll never be able to credibly accuse anyone else. By the time she realizes what's happened, we'll all be beyond the reach of U.S. authorities. They were talking about me like I was already dead, discussing my destruction with the casual efficiency of people planning a business merger. The woman clearly outranked Marcus in whatever organization they represented, and she viewed both him and me as expendable assets in a larger operation. The Singapore accounts are ready for the final transfers? Jake asked. Tomorrow afternoon. Marcus will initiate the domestic transfers during his lunch break, and by evening, the money will be moving through channels the FBI will never be able to trace. We'll be finished with this operation and ready to start fresh in South America. South America. So that's where Marcus planned to disappear once he'd framed me for his crimes. Probably somewhere without an extradition treaty, where he could live comfortably on stolen money while I spent decades in federal prison. The woman closed the briefcase and handed it back to Jake. Return this to exactly where you found it. Marcus can't know we were here. What if he changes his mind? What if he decides he can't go through with framing Elena? The woman's smile was cold enough to freeze blood. Marcus sealed his fate the moment he started skimming money from our operations. For his personal accounts, he's been stealing from us for 6 months, thinking we wouldn't notice. Tomorrow's plan serves our purposes perfectly. Marcus eliminates a potential witness, takes responsibility for crimes that go far beyond what he actually committed, and disappears before he can reveal any details about our organization. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Marcus wasn't just a criminal. He was a criminal who'd made the mistake of stealing from even more dangerous criminals. They were using his plan to frame me as a way to eliminate him as a threat while protecting their larger operation. I was trapped between a man who planned to destroy my life and people who planned to destroy his. The group moved toward the front door as quietly as they'd entered. I remained frozen behind the kitchen island until I heard the lock engage, then waited another 10 minutes before emerging from my hiding place. Marcus was still sleeping peacefully, unaware that his criminal partners had just been discussing his elimination. Tomorrow, he would initiate what he thought was his master plan to frame me and escape with stolen money. Instead, he would be walking into a trap set by people who viewed him as just another loose end to tie up. I should have felt satisfaction, knowing that Marcus would face consequences for his crimes. Instead, I felt only a growing sense of urgency. If the organization decided that I knew too much, my life would be in danger regardless of what happened to Marcus. I needed help, but I couldn't trust the anonymous contact who'd been feeding me information. For all I knew, they were part of the same organization, manipulating me for purposes I didn't understand. There was only one person I could trust with what I'd discovered. Someone with the authority and resources to protect me while investigating. Marcus's operation. I retrieved my phone and composed a careful message to Sarah Chen, my former mentor who now worked as a federal prosecutor specializing in financial crimes. Sarah had guided my early career in forensic accounting and remained a trusted friend despite our professional paths diverging. Sarah, I need to talk to you urgently about a case. It's personal and potentially dangerous. Can you meet me tomorrow morning before work? It's about international money laundering and I may be in immediate danger. I sent the message, knowing that Sarah would respond quickly if she was available. Federal prosecutors didn't ignore credible reports of financial crimes, especially from forensic accountants they trusted. The laptop still contained evidence I needed to preserve, but I'd been away from Marcus's bed too long. If he woke up and found me gone, he might become suspicious enough to change his plans, and I needed him to proceed predictably so I could stay ahead of the situation. I took one final look around the kitchen, memorizing the details of an apartment, where I'd spent countless happy evenings with a man who'd been planning my destruction from our first kiss. Then I returned to bed, lying carefully beside someone who felt like a stranger wearing Marcus's face. As I listened to him breathing in the darkness, I thought about the psychological profile he'd compiled on me, predicting my reactions with scientific precision. Marcus believed he knew me well enough to manipulate every aspect of my response to his betrayal. But there was one thing his profile hadn't accounted for. I was a forensic accountant precisely because I was good at finding hidden truths and building cases against people who thought they were smarter than the system. Tomorrow, Marcus would discover that he'd underestimated the woman he'd spent 2 years studying. And I would find out whether the skills that made me successful at exposing financial criminals would be enough to save my life when the criminals decided to fight back. Sarah Chen's response came through at 5:47 a.m., while Marcus still slept beside me. Meet me at the Federal Building downtown, 7 a.m. Use the Elm Street entrance and ask for me specifically. Elena, if you're in real danger, we can provide protection starting immediately. I slipped out of bed and dressed silently, leaving a note for Marcus saying I had an early client meeting. By 6:30, I was sitting in Sarah's office on the 14th floor of the Federal Building, watching her face grow increasingly grim as I laid out everything I'd discovered. Jesus, Elena, she breathed when I finished my account. You've stumbled into something much bigger than a simple money laundering operation. These account numbers you photographed. We've been tracking this network for 8 months as part of a joint task force with DEA and CIA. She pulled up files on her computer, showing me surveillance photos that included both Jake and the Asian woman I'd seen in Marcus's apartment. Lin Wei, Sarah said, pointing to the woman. She's a lieutenant in a Taiwanese organization that's been moving drug money through U.S. financial institutions. We knew they had someone inside Meridian Financial, but we couldn't identify who. So Marcus is just a mid-level player? He was, but the intelligence you've gathered suggests he's been skimming from the operation, which makes him incredibly dangerous to everyone involved, including you. Sarah leaned forward, her expression intense. Elena, these people don't leave loose ends. If they suspect you know anything about their operation... She didn't need to finish. I'd seen enough in Lin Wei's cold smile to understand what happened. To people who became inconvenient. What's our next move? I asked. We bring Marcus in before he can execute his plan to frame you. But we need to be smart about this. If we arrest him too early, Lin Wei's organization will disappear, and we'll lose our chance to take down the entire network. Sarah outlined a plan that was both elegant and terrifying. I would return to Marcus, act normally, and allow him to begin his scheme to plant evidence in my apartment. But instead of being an unwitting victim, I would be wearing a wire and coordinating with federal agents who would document every aspect of his attempted frame job. The moment Marcus plants evidence against you, we'll have him on multiple federal charges, Sarah explained. Then we'll use his cooperation to set up a sting operation against Lin Wei and her associates. And if Marcus refuses to cooperate, given what you've told me about his psychological profile of you, I think he'll jump at the chance to save himself. Men like Marcus are fundamentally cowards. They only feel powerful when they're manipulating people they perceive as weaker. Thought about the way Marcus had looked at me the night before, the desperate fear in his eyes when he'd assured me his love was real. Sarah was right. Underneath all his planning and manipulation, Marcus was terrified of consequences. There's something else, I said, showing Sarah the screenshots of messages from my anonymous contact. Someone's been feeding me information, someone who knows details about Marcus's operation that even I couldn't access. Sarah studied the messages, frowning. The timing is too convenient. My guess is that Lin Wei's organization has someone else, inside Meridian, someone who discovered Marcus was skimming, and decided to eliminate him by exposing his activities. So I've been a pawn in a larger game from the beginning. Maybe. But now you're a player with federal protection and the evidence to bring down everyone involved. By 9 a.m., I was fitted, with a sophisticated recording device, and heading back to my apartment, where Marcus would be planting evidence within the next few hours. Federal agents were already in position around my building, ready to document his crimes while keeping me safe. I felt strangely calm as I entered my apartment and saw the subtle signs of Marcus's presence. A slightly moved picture frame, a book not quite aligned properly on my shelf. He'd been here, just as his files had predicted, but he'd underestimated how well I knew my own space. My phone rang. Marcus. Hey, sweetheart, he said, his voice carrying its familiar warmth. How did your early meeting go? Productive, I replied truthfully. How's your day looking? Busy, but manageable. Listen, I was thinking we should have dinner tonight. Maybe that new Italian place downtown? We need to celebrate our engagement. Properly. Our last supper, I thought. Marcus wanted one final romantic evening before destroying my life, probably to ease his conscience about what he planned to do. That sounds perfect, I said. I love you, Marcus. I love you too, Elena. More than you know, the tragedy was that I almost believed him. Despite everything I'd learned, part of me still wanted to find evidence that Marcus's feelings for me had been genuine, that somewhere underneath the lies and manipulation was the man I'd fallen in love with. At noon, Sarah called with an update. We've been monitoring Marcus's communications, and he's definitely proceeding with today's timeline. He initiated the domestic transfers an hour ago, which means Linway's organization will move the money internationally this afternoon. And then? Then Marcus becomes expendable to them, just like you. Elena, we need to accelerate our timeline. Can you get Marcus to meet you somewhere public this afternoon? Somewhere we can arrest him safely? I thought about Marcus's invitation to dinner, then had a better idea. What if I invite him to lunch instead? Tell him I want to discuss wedding plans. He won't be able to resist the irony of planning our future while destroying it. Perfect. Set it up. I called Marcus back, suggesting we meet at Celestino's for lunch, the same restaurant where our engagement celebration had been derailed by a recording device that now seemed like ancient history. Celestino's? Marcus sounded surprised. Isn't that a bit expensive for lunch? I want to go back there. Last night felt unfinished, and I'd like to make new memories in that beautiful dining room. There was a pause before Marcus agreed, and I could almost hear him calculating whether my suggestion fit his psychological profile of my likely behavior. Apparently it did, because he agreed to meet me at 1 p.m. Actually, I added, let's sit at the same table we had last night. I'll call ahead and request it specifically. Another pause. Marcus was definitely thinking about the recording device he'd found under that table, wondering if my request was coincidental or if I knew something I shouldn't. Of course, he finally said. That's very romantic of you. At 12:45, I was seated, at the same table where this nightmare had begun, watching Marcus approach through the restaurant's main dining room. He looked exactly like the man I'd fallen in love with, confident, handsome, carrying himself with the easy grace that had first attracted me. But now I could see the calculation behind his smile, the way his eyes scanned the room for threats or surveillance. You look beautiful, he said, kissing my cheek as he sat down. I'm sorry about last night. I wasn't feeling well, and I know the family was disappointed. They understood, though my mother did ask me this morning if everything was all right between us. Marcus's hand tightened slightly on his water glass. What did you tell her? That we were working through some things, but I was confident everything would work out exactly as it should. That's good. That's very good. Marcus relaxed slightly, apparently interpreting my words as reassurance rather than the warning. They actually were. We ordered lunch and made conversation about wedding plans with the surreal civility of two people pretending their relationship wasn't built on lies. Marcus played his part perfectly, discussing flower arrangements and guest lists while simultaneously orchestrating my downfall. I've been thinking about our honeymoon, he said over dessert. Maybe somewhere exotic. Singapore is supposed to be beautiful this time of year. I nearly choked on my tiramisu. Marcus was actually suggesting we honeymoon in the same city where he'd been laundering money and setting up his escape plan. Singapore sounds wonderful, I managed, though I might be too busy with work to travel internationally for a while. Oh? New case? Something like that. Actually, it's funny. I'm investigating a financial fraud case that has some similarities to your compliance work. International money laundering, shell companies, the whole elaborate setup. Marcus went very still. Similarities how? The perpetrators used legitimate financial institutions to move illicit funds, And they had inside help from compliance officers who were supposed to be preventing exactly that kind of activity. That's terrible. People who abuse positions of trust like that should face serious consequences. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Marcus was condemning his own crimes while looking me directly in the eyes, apparently confident that his psychological profile of me was accurate enough to predict that I would never suspect him. I completely agree, I said, though I have to admire the technical sophistication of the scheme. Whoever designed it really understood how to exploit weaknesses in the international banking system. You sound almost impressed. Professionally, I am. It takes real skill to create that kind of operation. Of course, the same skills that make someone good at hiding money also make them good at getting caught when investigators know what to look for. Marcus's smile faltered slightly. Investigators like you? Investigators like the federal task force that's been tracking this particular network for 8 months. The color drained from Marcus's face. For a moment, we stared at each other across the table while the weight of my words settled between us. Elena, he said carefully, what exactly are you telling me? I'm telling you that I know about Singapore. I know about the $2.3 million deposit. I know about Lin Wei and Jake and the money laundering operation you've been running through Meridian Financial. Marcus sat back in his chair as if I'd struck him. You don't understand what you're talking about. I understand perfectly. I also understand that you've been planning to frame me for your crimes and that Lin Wei's organization is planning to eliminate you once you've served your purpose. Elena, listen to me. No, Marcus. You listen to me. I leaned forward, my voice low but steady. I've spent the last 12 hours documenting everything. The FBI has copies of your financial records, your communications with Lin Wei, and evidence of the scheme you planted in my apartment this morning. Marcus's eyes darted around the restaurant, looking for escape routes or surveillance. You're wearing a wire. Yes, I am. And federal agents are positioned throughout this restaurant, ready to arrest you the moment I give them the signal. Jesus, Elena, you have no idea what you've done. These people, if you've exposed their operation, they'll kill both of us. That's why you're going to cooperate with the FBI. You're going to help them take down Lin Wei's network, and in exchange, you'll get protection and a reduced sentence. Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. Reduced sentence? Elena, I'm facing life in prison. They'll never let me live long enough to testify. Then you should have thought about that before you decided to destroy my life to save yourself. I never wanted to hurt you. For a moment, the mask slipped completely, and I saw genuine anguish in his eyes. Everything I felt for you was real. The plan to frame you, it was survival, not malice. You compiled a psychological profile on me, Marcus. You predicted my reactions like I was a lab rat. That's not love. That's sociopathy. I was protecting. You, if I'd involved you willingly, Lin Wei would have killed you the moment you became inconvenient. This way, you would have been arrested, but alive. In federal prison for the rest of my life. I would have found a way to clear you eventually. Once I was safe, once I had enough money to disappear properly, I would have sent evidence exonerating you. I stared at him, amazed by his ability to rationalize betrayal as protection. You actually believe that, don't you? I believe I'm the only thing standing between you and people who solve problems by making witnesses disappear. As if summoned by his words, I saw Lin Wei enter the restaurant with 2 of her security men. She scanned the dining room until her eyes found our table, then smiled with cold satisfaction. Too late, Marcus whispered. She knows you're here. She knows we're talking. My training took over. I pressed the small button on my purse that would signal the federal agents, then stood calmly as Lin Wei approached our table. Ms. Rodriguez, she said pleasantly, what a surprise to see you here. Marcus and I have some business to discuss. Actually, I replied. I think our business is concluded. That's when Sarah Chen emerged from the kitchen entrance with 6 federal agents, weapons drawn. Lin Wei, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit money laundering, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit murder. The restaurant erupted into controlled chaos as federal agents moved to secure all exits and arrest Lin Wei's associates. Other diners dropped to the floor or fled toward emergency exits while Lin Wei remained perfectly composed, her hands raised slightly in a gesture of surrender. Very impressive, Ms. Rodriguez, she said as agents approached with handcuffs. Marcus said you were intelligent, but I think he underestimated you considerably. Among other things, I replied. Marcus sat frozen in his chair as agents moved to arrest him as well. As they read him his rights, he looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Regret, admiration, or something else entirely. Elena, he said as they prepared to lead him away, I need you to know that loving you was the only honest thing I did in 2 years. I wanted to respond with anger or contempt, but instead I felt only sadness for the man he might have been if he'd chosen differently. I know, I said simply. 6 months later, I testified at the trial that dismantled Lin Wei's entire money laundering network. Marcus cooperated fully with federal prosecutors, providing detailed information about the organization's structure and operations. His testimony helped convict 17 people, including Lin Wei herself, who received a life sentence. Marcus was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. During the sentencing hearing, he looked directly at me for the first time since his arrest. Your Honor, he said, I want Elena Rodriguez to know that the psychological profile I compiled was wrong about one crucial thing. It predicted that she would be too trusting to see through my deception, too emotionally invested to act against me even when she suspected the truth. Elena proved that prediction false, and I'm grateful she did. She saved both our lives by being stronger and smarter than I gave her credit for. The federal prosecutor had offered me victim impact statement time, but I declined. I'd said everything I needed to say to Marcus that afternoon at Celestino's. I kept my engagement ring for exactly 1 year, then donated it to a charity auction that raised money for victims of financial crimes. The symbolism felt appropriate, transforming something that represented deception into genuine help for people who'd been betrayed by others they trusted. My forensic accounting practice grew substantially after the trial. Apparently, helping expose a major international money laundering scheme was excellent marketing for someone who investigated financial crimes. I specialized in cases involving romantic fraud, helping other people who'd discovered that their partners weren't who they claimed to be. The anonymous contact who'd helped me expose Marcus was never identified. Though Sarah suspected it was someone else inside Meridian Financial who'd discovered Marcus's skimming and wanted him eliminated without getting directly involved. Whoever they were, they'd saved my life by giving me the information I needed. To stay ahead of the conspiracy, I never returned to Celestino's restaurant. Some associations are too strong to overcome, even when the outcome is positive. 2 years after the trial, I was planning a charity gala for victims of financial fraud when my assistant brought me an invitation that made me smile. Rebecca and David were renewing their wedding vows, and they wanted me to plan the celebration. Something small and intimate, Rebecca had written. Just family and close friends. We want to celebrate 15 years of marriage with the people who matter most. As I began planning their renewal ceremony, I thought about the difference between relationships built on truth and those constructed from lies. Rebecca and David had weathered financial struggles, career changes, and the ordinary challenges that test every marriage. But they'd face those challenges together, with honesty and mutual support. Marcus and I had shared wine preferences and weekend trips and conversations about our future, but we'd never had the foundation of trust that makes a relationship genuine. I'd been in love with a performance, carefully calibrated to match my desires and expectations. The irony was that if Marcus had been honest from the beginning, If he'd told me about his financial problems, his poor decisions, even his involvement with criminal organizations, I might have tried to help him find a legal solution. I'd fallen in love with someone I thought was fundamentally decent but flawed, not someone who was fundamentally deceptive but charming. But Marcus had never given honesty a chance. He'd seen me as a mark to be manipulated rather than a partner to be trusted, and that choice had destroyed any possibility of real connection between us. Standing in my office 3 years later, successful and independent and surrounded by evidence of the life I'd built for myself, I felt grateful for that missing chair at our engagement dinner. The recording device that had terrified Marcus into revealing his true nature had actually been a gift, the beginning of my escape from a future that would have destroyed me. Sometimes the most dangerous thing about loving someone isn't that they'll break your heart. It's that they'll convince you to break your own principles in service of a lie. I never made that mistake again. The last I heard, Marcus was scheduled for release in 8 years with good behavior. I hoped prison had taught him the value of honesty, but I suspected he was more likely learning new ways to manipulate people into trusting him. Either way, it was no longer my concern. I had my own life to live, built on a foundation of truth rather than performance. And for the first time since that night at Celestino's, when Marcus had whispered his panicked warning about looking under the table, I felt completely safe in my own choices. The recording device that had started everything now sat in an FBI evidence locker, its secret finally revealed. But the real secret, the one Marcus had never understood, was that the strongest foundation for any relationship is the courage to be honest about who you really are, even when the truth is inconvenient. Especially then. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.